In this tutorial, I want to discuss the workflow between ChronoSculpt and MODO. Now, in the previous tutorial with workflow and interchange between Maya, we started in LightWave first to get the motion data and then came into ChronoSculpt. But since ChronoSculpt is actually a standalone application, we don't have to start in LightWave. We could actually import an OBJ, FBX, LWO straight into ChronoSculpt and start with no cache file. So as you see now, if I scrub through the timeline, this splash, it could be a water splash or a paint splatter, has no animation on it. We're going to create that animation in ChronoSculpt and then transfer the motion data into MODO. So if I come back to the first frame, we can use tools such as the drag tool, and I'm going to increase the number of frames to say 250. And we can very easily just scale the brush up and start manipulating this splash. Now you'll see on the timeline that we have a morph. We can actually click and drag this around as we wish and position it anywhere on the timeline. We can also extend it and change the start time. If we come over to ease out, we can grab the top handle of the Bezier and shift it all the way over to the right. And that's exactly what we want it to do because we don't want this morph to fade out. We want it to continue till frame 250. So let's shorten the ending a little bit and then drag the morph all the way to the end. And drag the start all the way to the beginning. So this is going to be a slow motion water splash. And if we scrub through now, you can see that we do have something happening already. And so far that looks pretty good just by doing a few tweaks. Let's come back to the beginning and go to ease in. Let's just add a bit of an ease in, ease out so it doesn't start or end so abruptly. And you can see that those changes happen interactively on the timeline. We can also come to, say, about a quarter of the way in, and still with the drag tool selected, manipulate some of the smaller areas. So maybe move that guy up. And you can see as soon as I start doing that, we get another morph on the timeline. And we're going to do the same thing. Just bring the end out, come over to ease out, and let's drag that handle all the way to the right. Bring the start in, and maybe let's not have that start right away. We'll move it over to about a quarter of the way in. Actually, let's move it over here, and then bring the start to about a quarter of the way in. And again, let's give a little bit of tension. So now you can see that we have both those morphs slowly starting. Okay. Now we can also manipulate individual objects in this mesh. So as you can see, this little droplet here is not connected to the overall mesh, which means that we could use the transform tool and select it. And you can see that we can come anywhere on the timeline and just maybe move it over a little bit. Say we want it to go further than the rest of the mesh is going. And you see we get a morph just for that object there. And if we scrub through, you can see that that change happens. It goes in and then out. But we want to do the same thing. Let's shift the end out like that. And drag it over towards the end. Let's have it start relatively close to the beginning. And give it some tension as well. And now you can see that that change is happening by itself. So very quickly, we created this slow motion splash, and you can mess with it as much as you want to get the result you're looking for. But at this point, we are now ready to take this motion data directly into MODO. Now, what's cool is that MODO imports LWO files directly from LightWave, and it also imports MDD files, which you can export directly from LightWave and ChronoSculpt. So at this point, all we want to do is come to frame 0, and let's go to File, Save MDD, and I'm just going to save this as Splash, and let's hit Save. So now we're ready to jump into MODO. So here we are inside of MODO, and all I did was import the LWO file directly from LightWave's modeler, and you can see that it imports perfectly fine. Now we want to add the motion data file, the MDD file, onto this object that we exported from ChronoSculpt. There's a couple ways to do this. We could hit 5 to go into item mode, and right-click on the mesh, add deformer, and add the MDD influence. Now, if you have a lot of objects in your scene, it might be easier to go up to the scene graph and just right-click on Splash, come down to Add Deformer, and this is going to go off screen, but it would be Influences and then MDD Influence. So for the sake of this tutorial, I'll just do it through the mesh. Select Splash. Now, right now, we're in model mode, so you're not going to see anything happening, but you can see that we do have some options for the MDD down here. But for now, the default settings are going to work just fine. If we come over to the Animate tab and scrub through the timeline, you can see that we have the splash exactly as we have it in ChronoSculpt. Now, it is a little bit longer than the time range given, so let's right-click on the timeline, go to Time Ranges, and for current, let's set this to 250 frames, because that's how long we made it in ChronoSculpt. Hit OK. And if we scrub through the timeline now, you see we have everything exactly as we had it in ChronoSculpt. And at this point, you are now ready for your final render. So the workflow and interchange between ChronoSculpt and MODO is actually very easy, and I hope that you guys realize how easy this transition is and can apply this to some of your projects at home. And that's about it. I look forward to seeing what you guys come up with.